delight to be speaking before you, and especially so because I'm speaking to a group of individuals and professionals who have dedicated their lives and their time to a cause which is so much deeply interlinked with the idea of humanity. So my salute to all of you, and I really mean it. I'm not saying it upfront in a contemporary sense. You, as we say in the Urdu language, the Masihai in one hand, and in addition to that, you dedicate your time for such a great cause. We salute you. The topic that was given to me for 30 minutes or so. As a professor, I'm so used to 1 hour, but I'll take it and I'll finish my thoughts in about 30 minutes or so. But the topic that was given to me, or that we decided upon, was the teachings of Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib and their relevance to the global reality today. And what I did to think further about this, I have framed it in the context of, and what I pitched this to you up front, as we say, my final thoughts, my conclusion up front, and then I'll make a case in front of you, is the need of the hour to reimagine Ali. To reimagine Ali ibn Abi Talib so that we can reframe him in reference to the cause of humanity, which was the central essence of his message. Now, how am I going to do that? First and foremost, someone can ask, and someone can say that this is because all those who love Ali, who are in a great majority there, it is a confessional message, or it is a confessional matter for them. Because you love Ali, you think Ali is so central to everything. So I will make a case, and that I made that case in my book also, which is available here. But I'll make the case first based on 2 central principles. Very simple. And the beauty of the message of Ali and the message of Islam that he was portraying was always the beauty is in its simplicity and its clarity. 2 statements up front for you. As Ali alayhi salam had said, the people are of 2 kinds. Either you are my brother in faith, or you are my brother in humanity. The second quote, he was asked, Imam Ali was approached, and the second one is relatively unknown, or relatively less known. The first quote that I mentioned to you, that is relatively well known. The second one is when a young person approached him and said to him that, Mawla, what is the criterion of leadership? I want to become a leader. What is the criterion? And Imam said, he said, service to humanity prepares you for a leadership role. Service to humanity. That's why I'm making the case in a global sense of humanity. Now what I want to do is present to you like an academic. We often say, if you have to make a case, like what I am pitching to you, I must mention up front, I will be a little provocative, and I know I'm talking to a very enlightened audience, so I'm going to take some liberties with you. Of course, we all cherish our majalis and our religious centers. I'm not standing there in the podium of a religious center. I'm talking to you in my role as an academic and a scholar. So I will frame it as such. First and foremost, if I'm making a case for reimagining Ali and reframing his cause today for relevance in the world of humanity, is there a gap there? And I would argue there is a gap that exists. There's something which I will call it a missing link. There is a disconnect which allows us, and what is that disconnect? First I will explain to you 4 major points. Why is there a disconnect which allows us to reimagine Ali? And then about 4 principles that I'll talk about which will help us borrow some ideas to reimagine Ali. That's with these 8 points within the next about 25 minutes or so I'll conclude. So first and foremost, where is that gap? And what that gap is all about? I'll borrow a statement from a great Iranian scholar, one of the founders of the Islamic Revolution in Iran, Ali Shariati. Ali Shariati had very assertively argued And he had said, the lovers of Ali, and the Shi'ani Ali, what he meant, they have built walls around Ali. And he had said, the Shi'ani Ali have not only built walls around Ali, they have isolated Ali in their own narrative. And I'll come to a bit later what we mean by that and how do I explain it. The second point is, in this world today, why there is need to reimagine Ali? Because at one level there is this global polarization between the right and the left. The massive increase in displacement of ordinary people, the refugees. This audience knows it well. At the same time, the growing gap between rich and the poor. The figures are absolutely astonishing. With all these three major challenges and crises, unprecedented crisis in a way, there is this new urge that people realize that there is a missing spiritual link in terms of our understanding how we understand our lives, how we understand our mission, how we understand our objectives, and even those who are religious, people who are religious in nature, believe that there is a spiritual disconnect, that their spirituality is not in a position to answer how to find solutions to the problems that I just mentioned to you. The third gap, which is so relevant for us to understand, is what I couldn't find anything better but to borrow actually a verse from Iqbal, who had said, ढूंढने वाला सितारों की गुज़रगाहों का, ढूंढने वाला सितारों की गुज़रगाहों का, अपने अफकार की दुनिया में सफर कर न सका. Meaning thereby that with all these scientific advancement and with all the growth and development, at the same time the level of ethical considerations, the level of spiritual excellence is finding such a huge gap that which is irreconcilable. The fourth point, in terms of where is the gap, and here I will come to the contemporary issues, is the challenge of extremism. And I'll just give you one example. What just happened in Afghanistan? Can we really make sense of that? Let me just tell you two things. A group which is known for terrible human rights record, the Taliban. Hazara massacre is one thing. What happened to ordinary women and children is another in front of us. And they faced for 20 years the mightiest military in the world. And what has unraveled in front of our eyes is astonishing. Taliban are back in power. So what this means for the Islamic discourse, if you're standing as a Muslim answering any Western audience, or perhaps any audience in the world, how can you explain? Because one would argue, the resilience, the resistance, the movement, the revolution is clearly in the hands of Taliban, it seems. Through their resilience, they have been able to overpower and they are back in power. What this means for you as a Muslim? If I'm a Western and I'm asking you, well, whatever great talk you had about your religious values and human rights and your religious doctrine, whether it is Muslim Brotherhood, whether it is Al-Qaeda, whether it is ISIS in Iraq or elsewhere, it is your extremist groups which appear to have dominated not only through fear of terrorism in certain cases. I get it, they are in a minority. But wherever there is a movement for resilience and there is a movement or a pushback against the outsider, it is your most hardliner religious community which wins the day. What is your answer to that? I want to answer this question from the teachings of Ali ibn Abi Talib. There is the gap, this is the gap that I'm talking about. And the very last point, and I can be very blunt with this audience here. The last point about the gap that exists in the contemporary world is about the poison of sectarianism. Let me tell you up front, and I follow the discourse in the Arab world and also in South Asia, that's my day job as an academic and as a political scientist. Many a times there are leading scholars, Barelvi or Sunni scholars in South Asia and elsewhere, who will write great fadail, great praise of the Ahlul Bayt, and then something happens suddenly. I'm mentioning two major scholars. One is Mr. Jamil. Whenever he talks about the great fadail of Ahlul Bayt, he's immediately challenged, Mr. Jamil is becoming a Shia. And what's the normal response? that scholar will immediately step back and say, no, 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 I'm not Shia. I love Ahl Bayt. So what has gone wrong in the Muslim internal discourse that you just immediately shy away even from a distant link and association with Ahl Bayt or one name, one title? The difference of opinion is absolutely fine. The jurisprudence is all good. The debates and historical reference among religious issues have always historically been very central to Muslim discourse. However, to develop such a level of animosity that you immediately want to disconnect with anything, or you want to destroy someone in a religious context, in a religious madrasa, you declare belonging to a certain sect, and all the people belonging to the other sect will immediately say, no, 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 I'm not that. So these are the 5 things, thank you for your patience, these are the 5 things I wanted to mention in a global context, in a Muslim context as well, where there is a huge disconnect and where there is a need for us to reimagine Ali and to reframe Ali. So 4 principles that I want to present before you, which I think will help us reimagine Ali. Even those who claim, like all of us, including myself, who believe that the love of Ali is so much entrenched in our hands. Really, let us think about it. But for this, I thought how to transition from a very contemporary, this disconnect, reference to the message and the love of Ali, and I thought there is no better way but to borrow something from the great work of Iftikhar Arif, who later tonight we will hear from him as well, his poetry. But he has so many books of poetry, but there is one short collection which is titled Heir Ilm Ke Darwaze Par. In fact, Heir Ilm Ke Darwaze Par, when I have so many books, I think I have bought dozens of copies and presented it. Only now I realize I was today looking at it to find this verses that I'm going to share with you in a second. And I found that actually one of their most important supporters of Iftikhar Arif is Jafar, his wife. They have been great supporters of Iftikhar Arif. Thank you very much. Please applause for them. So to transition to what Heir Ilm Ke Darwaze Par Iftikhar Arif is saying, he said, "Kabhi kabhi dil ye sochta hai." Kabhi kabhi, I'll try to translate it later on as well. Kabhi kabhi dil ye sochta hai, न जाने हम बेयकीन लोगों को नामे हैदर से रब्त क्यों है। कभी कभी दिल ये सोचता है, न जाने हम बेयकीन लोगों को नामे हैदर से रब्त क्यों है। हकीम जाने वो कैसी हिकमत से आशना था, शजी जाने कि बदर खैबर की फतहमंदी का राज क्या था, अलीम जाने कि वो इल्म के कौन से खजीनों का नाखुदा था। हकीम जाने वो कैसी हिकमत से आशना था, शजी जाने के बदर खैबर की फतहमंदी का राज क्या था, अलीम जाने कि वो इल्म के कौन से सफीनों का नाखुदा था। मुझे तो बस सिर्फ ये खबर है, वो मेरे मौला की खुशबू में रचा बसा था, वो उनके दामाने आतिफत में पला बड़ा था। सो उनको महबूब जानता हूँ, उनको मकसूद जानता हूँ। So that's the relevance. So this part is easy for all of you to understand. Ali lives in our hearts. Ali lives in our hearts on day-to-day basis. And we love Ali because Ali is exactly who reflected all that was in the Prophet's life. I'll just share one anecdote to this book, The Prophet's Heir. And I'm so glad for tremendous support from our community for this book. I'm honored that this is the first book by any Western academic publisher. But one of the first events for this book happened in a very large Sunni mosque in California. And one day before the book launch, this was about the 13th of Rajab. So the leading Imam, Ali Sunnat wal Jamaat, I have tremendous respect for him. He called me and said, he speaks Urdu as well, and you'll understand. He said, Hassan Sahab, tomorrow is the event. Please thodi si ehtiyat kijiyega. Excuse me, what do you mean? What kind of ehtiyat, what kind of care I need to do? He said, look, we have 1,100 people who have signed up for your book event, and you know, majority of them are all Sunnis. I said, don't worry at all. So the event happened. It's available on the web. When he introduced me, he said, so I've read the book, The Prophet's Heir, and Hassan Abbas thinks like a Sunni and Hassan Abbas writes like a Sunni. When my opportunity came, I was a little, there was a setback, but then I said, no, it's fine. The event went very well. I got into a little bit of heated debate, that was fine. After the event, I called him. And he's also saying, I said, Shah Sahab, I'm honored. I'm from a mixed family. My grandfather was a Shia, my grandmother was a Sunni, my mother one was a Shia, was a Sunni. I am really honored. I'm equally fine if Sunnis consider me Sunni, Shia consider me Shia. But can you share with me why you mentioned this, that I write like a Sunni and I think like a Sunni probably, why that's so? He gave me an answer which I want to actually share with all Shias if I could. He, in all his honesty, said to me, he said, you know, the first 2 chapters of your book are completely in awe and in love of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said, okay. Then, because it's the Prophet's hair, I had to introduce the Prophet to talk about his hair. He said, but the kind of love that you have shown for the Prophet, it is only Sunnis who love the Prophet like that. I said, really? But then it got me a shock. And this is what I want you to think about. He was honest in his understanding, in his viewpoint. He said to me, look, you guys think of Ali as equal to him. I said, no, God forbid. Anyone who would say that will be outside the pale of even Islam, I would say. Shi'ism is a different thing. The point I'm arguing here is, the level of the disconnect between the Shia and the Sunni is so deep-rooted, is so entrenched, because there is no engagement. Do you talk to them? How often the Shia and Sunni centers meet with each other? How often we have debate and discussions on these issues? So often the major challenge from the Sunni brothers and sisters to me was, why are you calling the Prophet's heir? Abu Bakr was the heir. And I would argue, you know, have you looked at the word heir in a dictionary? So it has 3 meanings. Heir means very clearly that heir means a legal heir. Ali was the one who was buried the Prophet. Was there anyone who ever claimed that there was a legal heir who somebody else was there? I said, no. Okay, political heir. The other meaning of heir is political. So the word political gave a 4 political successes. Absolutely valid. Okay, Umar, Usman, Ali, no doubt. But Ali was one of the 4. At least so he's 1/4 of the political heir. And the last but not the least point is about the spiritual heir. Has anyone among even the first 3 caliphs ever claimed they were the spiritual heirs? Ask the Sufis. Don't be any mystic in the world, irrespective of their Hanafi, Shafi'i, Maliki hat. Ask them why you love Ali, why Ali is the patron saint of all the mystics and Sufis. It is so because they think Ali is the spiritual heir. I'm not reciting a majlis, but I can't hold myself from mentioning just one verse, Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 129, which says Prophet had 4 responsibilities: to recite to you the verses of Quran, teach you the book, teach you wisdom, and purify you. Who else did these 4 things? The heir was supposed to do these 4 things. And the heir of the Prophet, because Islam is the final message, has to continue to this day. That's why the word Mehdi, conference today. That's why we are linked to that. So that is my first point. In terms of where Ali's legacy, or why we have to reimagine Ali so that it is relevant. The second thing, a big thing, is going to be a little complicated, but stay with me. And as I said, I'm about 17 minutes in, I have 13 more minutes. The second way why we have to reimagine Ali is just looking at the time when Ali was the caliph. Why? Because I had introduced to you what Taliban are doing, how ISIS and Al-Qaeda have a certain narrative that is popular. All these 3 major challenges today were faced by Ali in his time. And he dealt with each one of those. Stay with me. The Battle of Camel. Greed and politics. People who were involved were very close to the Prophet. You cannot deny that. Don't try to deny that, please. However, when they diverted from the path, there was a way that Ali responded to them. Second, Nehrawan with the Khawarij. Khawarij were the founding fathers of the modern day extremism. Khawarij were the ones who were doing the takfir. Takfir, I'm sure all of you know. If not, you should know. Takfir means all those Wahhabis, Salafist extremists who would argue that we are the real Muslims. Anyone else who claims to be Muslim, unless you are following these lines, you're not a Muslim. Takfir. Now, Nehrawan the Khawarij were the first ones to do that. And then the founding father of modern authoritarianism, Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan. So Ali dealt with all three, and these three challenges exist to this day in some shape or form. What was Ali's response? That's where I have to borrow my second principle. Khawarij, there was a time when Ali defeated all of them in the Battle of Nahrawan, and the Muslims, very close associates of Ali, dig a huge grave and said, all of you are throwing all of them in this. I said, no, you can't do that. Imam Ali said, I am going to recite the funeral prayer for them. For Khawarij. Khawarij are the same one who are standing in the mosque. Imam Ali is the caliph, challenging him. And Imam Ali always allowed them to do that. Whenever Mawla was saying, ask me a question before I am not among you. In most cases, we interpret it as Imam is saying, I am all knowledgeable. I have all the knowledge, extensive knowledge, please ask me. I encourage you to interpret it in a slightly different way as well. He was also saying, ask me a question, I am here standing in front of you. He was indirectly saying, I am accountable. If you want to challenge, if you have a different position, stand up and you have that right to say that. So Mawla dealt with them by telling them to Khawarij, and when people ask them, Mawla, they are the worst of the creatures, this is the whole violence they did. You want the funeral prayer? They challenged him. And he said, yes, because they were misdirected. The principle I am borrowing today is, have you ever in this room, any one of us has ever tried to engage with the extremists? No, because we thought they are irreconcilable. Because we also took fear of them in a different way. So there's a little bit of introspection I want you to invite to, because I'm inviting you to reimagine Ali. Because if we are right, Ali's teachings have to have answers which help us deal with the modern day crisis that we face. Let me go to the third step. Ali ibn Abi Talib, how he dealt with during the time that he was, even the Sunni scholars will say, the opposition leader during the times of the first caliph. And after looking at his biographies after biographies, I have come up with 4 words that help me understand Ali during the times of the first 3 caliphs. And I'm not borrowing these, coming up with these words because these may be popular in the modern day parlance. No. The words are tolerance, forgiveness, selflessness, patience. If Ali was not patient, if Ali was not tolerant, he would have taken out the sword. And this is an extremely important point to make. I have explained to you, and what was the task given to the Prophet? To doing 4 things. The political leadership or political role was never one of the tasks that was given to the Prophet. The point I am making here is, Ali was always there to engage, even compromise, on issues where he thought unity is so central. And I'll explain to you later on, right in a few minutes, what he said on his deathbed. There are so many sermons, and I was really very surprised that in English language, in any of the biographies, we couldn't find any of his statements in one place, which I had to look and borrow from about 17, 18 different books, which I will conclude with. But this was my third major point of tolerance, of selflessness, of patience. And now, one small story, while my eyes are on the watch as well, 22 minutes in. I found an amazing book by a Sunni scholar, and I found a narration in it, which is, I can confidently now say, not available in any Shia sources, and I'm pretty surprised at that. This was his name was Weatherhead. Those of you from Pakistan who may have heard, he was the Inspector General of Police in Pakistan during Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's time. His name was Weatherhead. In fact, I had heard from my late father, who was a professor also, that one of his friends, Weatherhead, had written a book called Masnavi and Mawla Ali. And he would often quote from it. And I could never get my hands on it. When I was working on the biography of Imam Ali, I said, I have to find that book by a Sunni author called Masnavi and Mawla Ali. It took me many years, and I realized I knew his son. I got hold of one copy. That's another story why it's out of print and it's not being reprinted. Maybe we should reprint it. But 2 stories from it, very short. First, Mr. Weatherhead says He says that, in fact, he was a poet already. He said, I went to Medina. And he said, I went to Medina and I promised to the Prophet ﷺ, he said, look, I want to write your biography and praise, but I want to do it through verses. So I will write a biography in poetry. He said, I promised, went back to Pakistan. He said, I have been writing poetry for 30 years. He said, all of a sudden my capacity to write poetry was taken away from me. He said, I was extremely worried. It took me 6 months, a year. He said, I was really struggling hard. I had made a promise to the Prophet, and now my capacity to put everything in rhyme has been taken away. And he says, then a message came. And this is in the book. This is not a personal negative. This is written in the book. He says, then I saw a certain message through a dream, in which he said, I was told, to write Masnavi and Muhammad, you first have to write Masnavi and Maulana Ali. Without going to the door, you want to enter the city? How will that be possible? So he wrote it. And now from his book, I'm borrowing a story. He says that there was a time, this is the story for which I gave you that background. He says that on the day of the ascension to heaven, the event of Mi'raj, the Prophet went in front of God, and God gave the Prophet a special gift, and he calls it Kharkai Fakr. I have translated Kharkai Fakr as cloak of transcendent spiritual knowledge. A little hard, but I couldn't find any other words. So the cloak of transcendent spiritual knowledge, Kharkai Fakr. He said the Kharkai Fakr was given to the Prophet, and he comes back to on earth. And then he calls his 4 friends. Now, his book doesn't mention which 4 friends. He said 4 friends were called, and the Prophet said, look, this is a gift I received from God, and I want to share this gift with you. But there is going to be a question, and I'm going to test you. Whosoever gives me the best answer will get the Kharkai Fakr. So he said, tell me, if I give you this special transcendent power, what are you going to do with it? The first person says, to be accurate, I have to look at my notes. The first person said, I'll do justice. I will establish justice at it. The second person said, I am going to proselytize Islam. I am going to go to every corner of the world and project Islam. The third person said, actually, I'm going to get a lot of money and resources, and I'm going to use all that money in charity. And then comes the opportunity of Ali. Now he names Ali. We don't know who the other 3. It's fine. And Ali was asked, Ali, what are you going to do? The Prophet asked, what are you going to do with this Kharkai Fakr? And Imam Ali said, I am going to use this power and authority to conceal others' flaws. And Prophet said, that's it. You are the one who's going to get the Kharkai Fakr. Just think about this notion. The person who's going to conceal others' flaws is the one who, in the eyes of the Prophet, is the one who deserves to get the Kharkai Fakr. I then approached so many. The reason I mentioned this is not only for spiritual reasons. Maulana is sitting here, tremendous respect. I went to many scholars. I had a great opportunity to go to Najaf. My teacher was Ayatollah Sayyid Hakim, who helped me tremendously for the book. And I asked him as well, and many others. And I was told from every source, well, this story is not in our books. Maybe I could have. And then one scholar said to me, well, it is not there because it's reference to 4 people. I said, okay, the other 3 didn't get it. Ali got it. And so the story even fits your narrative. But still, the reference is not in our books. And this brings me to the 4th point. Hold on to this thought of some of the biases on our side as well. Keeping aside the beauty of the narratives. We have all, remember Ali Shariati? We have built walls around Ali, have made him isolated into our own narrative. Which then, if you are going to go to anyone and project Ali as the global voice of justice, or somebody who is an answer to the problems as the heir of the Prophet, you will not be taken seriously if your narrative is only popular among yourselves. The last point, which a letter, Ali's letter to Malik al-Ashtar, which should have become the most popular document in the world. I have tried this I teach in a university where students come from all services and government institutions from across the world, and they I showed them some of the quotes of Ali, and I said, who do you think said this? And the answers that I received were ranging from, oh, this sounds like Socrates. Oh, this sounds like Thomas Jefferson. I said, no, this is Ali ibn Abi Talib talking to Malik al-Ashtar about taxation, about telling him that if the tax collector has to go to the door, don't go to the door of an ordinary person. Invite them to a distant place so that if they decline paying taxes, accept their demand. You will be amazed the modernity or the contemporary relevance of all that is in that letter. And then I took the question to many of my Sunni scholars and said, can you tell me why this letter to Malik al-Ashtar? There's a very dear friend of mine who wrote a book, Governance in Islam. And I asked, why you have not even said one word about letter to Malik al-Ashtar? Just because Ali, you have a boss of Ali? He said, no, there's another reason. The letters to Malik al-Ashtar, in our history books, Malik al-Ashtar is seen as one of those who were involved in the killing of Usman, although which is totally fake and totally incorrect. The point I'm making, the Sunni biases, just to Malik al-Ashtar, not to Ali, not to the letter, and this is the sectarianism which has become a poison in a way that has disconnected us from these legacies. So these were my 4 points and the 4 principles I wanted to project. To remain honest to my promise, I'm at 30 minutes and I'll conclude to prove many of the proof in a sense, just to present and project just as ideas for thinking. I'll conclude with this one small sermon which Imam Ali said at the time of his death. And I have, there's a lot of research involved in that, which is in the book. The book I'm only referencing it, not only for selfish reasons. The book is the first one in the Western academic press, but also that it has been reviewed across the world. This is a way to present Ali to the non-Muslim, also to other sects. Everything I claim that I'm mentioning in the book has a mention in the Sunni references as well. So most of this is from Sunni sources. But the final statement of Ali, with which I want to close, which says it all, which links the whole argument about egalitarianism against tribalism, which is pulling the Muslim narrative down. Imam Ali said on his deathbed, and I read from my book in fact, do not seek the world even if it seeks you. Do not weep for anything that is taken away from you. Speak the truth. Speak the truth, show compassion for the orphan, succor those who are anxious. My prayer and my ritual, my life and my death is for God, the Lord of the worlds, who has no partner. And then he cited the verse of Quran, hold fast to the rope of God and avoid discord. And then Wala said, I heard Abul Qasim, this is exact word by word quote. I heard Abul Qasim, the Prophet, saying, the renewal of unity is better than all your prayers and fasting. The renewal of unity is more important or better than all your prayers and fasting. And then he's concluded by saying, fear God with regard to those who have a right to your protection and to your hospitality. Fear God with regard to the protection granted by your Prophet, and do not allow the dhimmi to be oppressed among you. I'll stop for a second. Who were the dhimmis at that time? Christians and Jews. So Ali, in his final moment, how many Christians and Jews were there in Mecca, Medina? Even then, or Kufa. Ali is giving his final message by saying, the Prophet has made a commitment to your minorities. Do not oppress them. And then he concluded by saying, fear God with regard to the poor and destitute, and give them the share in your livelihood. You must pursue harmony and generosity and avoid infighting, friction and fragmentation. I entrust you to God and I bid you favor, and the mercy of God be upon you. And that's right after this, the line of God's last roar, which was as powerful, as beautiful as it was honest. He said, by the Lord of Kaaba, I have triumphed. That is the way we need to reimagine Ali and make him relevant to humanity. Thank you very much.